national placement. We did a study visit, and on the study visit we visited a couple of different elite environments, all specific to football. So we went to the Clairefontaine National Football Centre in France. We also had opportunity as well to go and watch and observe Paris Saint-Germain train at their training facility. As I go through the presentation, we have an opportunity to ask questions, get involved, and I'll go through kind of each experience in kind of a logical order that it happened on the course. So just kind of an introduction really. We went to Paris, we went to Clairefontaine. Now their national coach, national technical coach, Frank Varela, he leads on the mental aspect of the game, so his big role and involvement with the FFF is around mental skills development. And that was one of the big things that I noticed when I went into the meeting, was he was very much dictating that in their programme they spend, certainly at the top end, so 21s and first team level, a massive proportion of their time focused around meditation, breathing techniques, just so that the headspace for the players before, during, after games is at the right moment, getting themselves into the right zone to compete in those pressurised situations. They had 3 guiding principles to training, so building it up into a kind of a formula. They talked about the process, so training sessions were strategically planned before the sessions in order to get the psychological outcomes, so whether it was practicing penalties or practicing being last minute of the game, 2-1 down, need a goal, those types of game type scenarios. The content in which the sessions were delivered, so there was a mixture of attacking, defending, transition practices, so it was all linked to the core principles of how they wanted to play. And the stance was the outcome, so how they evaluated each player's performance during training and after it. So the guiding thing for them was, and it was really important, that they sat down with each player individually at some point during the training camp and would talk, not necessarily just about the session, but just what they were thinking, obviously being called up, how they felt during and around the facility, and what they were expected to do when they went back into their own clubs. So that was just a really good insight of how they wanted to kind of structure their programme in terms of psychological aspects for their players. Moving on from that, so we spent a brief bit of time speaking and discussing about that. We went then to watch the under-17s play against Turkey. Now the biggest thing for me that I noticed when I went to watch, not just in terms of the players themselves, but it was more to do with the actual physical size and some of the profiling of the players. They were all very athletic, powerful players in compared to Turkey, who were quite slight in stature. Ended up, France dominated possession, dominated the game. Physically, they were a mile ahead of Turkey, but also as well, psychologically, they were very brave to play out. So some of the key traits they were talking about regarding psychological aspects of playing under pressure, because this was a pre-Euro 2020 campaign, they were talking about dominating possession, being the team who should win the game of football and are expected to. And they scored, I think they won 2-1. Scored very late on, so dying embers of the game had that psychological resilience to go ahead and win the game of football. Brings me on to the next part. So we talked about the top end there, and then went into Clairefontaine. They have an INF programme. The INF programme is for players who are aged 13 to 15, and it's a 2-year scholarship programme. So for us in England, we sign and register players into our academies at the ages of under 9. They become officially registered to the club. In France, it's very, very different. So what they do is, up to the ages of 15, because they can only sign when they're under 15, they are unregistered players. Now, all the big clubs in France will have under 12 Paris Saint-Germain, under 12 Lyon, things like that, but they're not officially registered to those clubs. So it's kind of a grassroots element with the professional badges sitting in front of it. It's very different to what we do back here. Now, one of the questions I asked was, in terms of competition for players, how does that look when you're talking about retaining players for long term? And the little bits that we spoke to, it was very much within the culture of the player and the area that they were brought up in, that they would stay predominantly with that club. Some boys, yeah, they did move to Paris Saint-Germain, to Lyon, to Marseille, but most of the time it was around players who stay with the club that they were kind of living in the local area. A little bit of history about Clairefontaine. Opened its doors to players in 1988, so that was the first kind of conveyor belt of players that came in. They recruit and trial players at 15 national centres, so 13 of them are in France, and then they have 2 centres outside of France that are French colony countries. So they have boys who come over from overseas. Both of them are located in Africa. So that's really interesting to see how they recruit the players for their programme. I think they're about to open next season a 16th centre, and that's going to be located in Paris. They deliver, as I mentioned, an elite programme, which is 2 years to the boys who are there. So those boys are recruited at under 13s, and then they spend 2 years with the INF programme. Those boys potentially have come from your Paris Saint-Germain, your Lyons, your Marseilles, all the other clubs. But then it's down to the player to decide whether or not they actually commit to the programme. It was interesting because when we discussed a few times with some of the Paris Saint-Germain coaches around do they want their players to be on the programme, some of them were quite sceptical of how good it was in comparison to what they were already getting back at the local clubs. The trialling process, so you'll see on one of the slides that the way in which they recruit the players, but they select a 23-player squad for that season to go on for 2 years. Very rarely, after speaking to the lead coach, very rarely do players kind of drop out. If anybody does drop out, they don't bring boys in, the numbers go smaller, rather than bringing the 24th best player in, they just leave it as it is. Big thing that I noticed over there was the education programme. Put a huge emphasis on delivering an education programme to the boys. So they would take them out of the normal school environment and they would provide education to them. Now historically they used to deliver the education at Clairefontaine, and what they've done in the past and most recent years is deliver the programme at a local high school, just to get them integrated with other kids who might not necessarily play football, but they're around boys, girls of the same age. So it gives them a little bit of a social programme element. So that was something that they've only done recently, because they think that the boys need to be outside of the 4 walls and get a real flavour of just being a kid. Obviously, just wanted to point out a couple of the big graduates that have come out. 3 World Cup winners on there. You've got Mbappe, Matuidi and Areola. So they've graduated from the Clairefontaine programme. So high profile players. Also as well World Cup winning players. So it's really interesting to kind of see that kind of at first glance, because I think we all have our own academies and it's really important to see the kind of outcome at the end. So having those 3 players as graduating from Clairefontaine who've done the 2-year programme, it goes to show that what they're doing is working. And just below is just a couple of pictures of the groups when I was there. They were the boys at the time training. Now, one of the big things that I noticed when I was over there, out of the 46 players, there was only 1 boy who was white. So that was really quite eye-opening in terms of how they recruit players and what they're actually looking for in terms of profiling. This is a little bit in terms of their recruitment process. So in France, it's FFF driven. So for us, we've got a lot tied up with the Premier League, the FA. In France, it's very, very different. Everything is governed by the FFF. So they oversee the whole programme in the country, and that gives them the 15 regional centres. Trials then dilutes again. 400 boys go to Clairefontaine on trial, and that's staggered in 6-week blocks. From the trials, 23 boys selected, 2-year scholarships are offered, and at the end of it, ideally, they're going back and feeding into pro clubs. Key factors for success around the INF programme that I kind of noticed and thought were really important. They recruit the best players from the country. So they have, as I mentioned, 15 regional centres. Everybody works for the FFF, and that gets the eyes on the players in those 15 centres. Just put their profile of play. It's interesting to see what type of players they're looking for as well. So powerful, athletic technicians. They're quite selective in terms of how they profile and recruit. Another thing when I was over there, big thing that stuck out in terms of the actual practices that were being delivered, really simplistic. There was no fancy sessions. Everything was really, really simple. So passing and receiving, 6 players, pass, volley pass, but the detail and also the authority that the coaches had when they were delivering the sessions was very, very demanding. That was one of the big things that I noticed. As I've already mentioned, high emphasis on technical repetition. A lot of the stuff, probably the first 40 minutes of each session was technical work, and a lot of that was unopposed or a ball between 2. Another thing was coach and player relationships. Do a lot of background checks, get to know the players, get to know the families. They select players as well based on, are they able to live away from home for that 2-year period? So that is all in terms of the processes done at Clairefontaine during those trials. And they do pride themselves on that. They think they're really, really good, and virginal, arrogant, they're very good at knowing the players. And we have an elite environment. So the actual national centre itself is unbelievable to look at, to see, but to be able to train and play there every day, as all environments kind of at academy levels are decent, this was unbelievable. And last one, family culture. Yeah, they're big on family, so when the players are recruited and they're in there for 2 years, they celebrate birthdays, they go on activity days, they do things together as a squad that not necessarily you do if you're in like a normal schooling environment. So they have a big push on the family culture, and that's driven from the coaches, the staff at Clairefontaine as well. And just a little bit to add there at the bottom, 30% of the players who attend Clairefontaine become professional footballers. For me, that really stuck out. But a lot of the boys that go there and are selected, not all of them, but a big proportion become professional footballers in all the divisions in France. My next bit, and this this just moving on now, we had a presentation from a newly promoted French club, Angers. So they're a Bournemouth type club from humble beginnings, got into the top league in France, and have really wanted to expand and become a namesake in French football. So the big thing for them is how do they generate commercial income and become a bit more of a brand with a small budget and infrastructure they have. So a couple of things. So they have a massive handball and futsal part of their programme, and they recruit players for that generates a lot of sponsorship and commercial income that helps to going towards the running of the club. So that's a big part of how they generate money. Abdul, who's the academy director, big thing about him is he is somebody who wants consistency. He didn't sign his new contract until the board had offered his staff 4-year contracts as well. So that's something that really stuck out. So he wanted that consistency, he wanted that continuity for the next 4 years, because he knew the coach that he employed were very good at what they did, but he also wanted to follow that through with them as well. Just a little bit really around the culture and an academy environment really. I think a big thing was in these small town cities in France, and I mentioned at the beginning, they recruit local players and they come all the way through. They have a real tie to the club. One of the things as well, compulsory for players to watch first team games. I think that's something that really stuck with me, because I know at our football club players have the option, but at this football club it's slightly different. It was compulsory. So for us, boys are travelling in from various different distances and things, but I don't know if that is something we could potentially add into what we do. It plays more of a feel with our club, as they do at Angers. We have non-negotiable club values. There's a big one as well. So anybody dips below the standard, maybe a warning, but then it's repeat offender, gone. We don't have many players in there, from what Abdul said, that stay if they've got poor attitudes. Another one that was really interesting, female staff. I think certainly in England, I think we're moving forwards where we have a lot of female staff who, various roles, whether it's coaching, whether it's physiotherapists, whether it's strength and conditioning, whether it's psychology. They have definitely we have more of them in the academy environment now. In clubs in France, they see the female role potentially as somebody who's there as a mothering figure, which they feel they've got loads of benefit from. They need somebody to be able to talk to kind of give advice that potentially the player doesn't want to give to the coach. So that was really interesting. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm not sure, but they seem to think it works. Coaching programme is flexible, so coaches go and deliver what they feel the team needs. We're very big on team at Angers. There's nothing about individual training, nothing about ILOs, nothing about individual learning plans. It was all about the team. If the team works, performance will follow. As I mentioned, the collective approach, team rather than individual. They feel that if you're a good team, then success and results will come as a byproduct to that. And key areas of success, so they do a lot of evaluation and monitoring. So just as an example up here, this is a proportion of where their players come from. So 50% of their current under-18s are local. In terms of their philosophy and playing styles, quite structured right the way through the age groups when you get to 11v11. And as you can see, massive emphasis at the older ages of tactical stuff, and it goes down into technique, physicality, mental approach. And something that I noticed was quite similar encompass all the different disciplines. So they did have quite a big multidisciplinary approach to their programme, where they'd have multidisciplinary meetings, everybody sits in, just as we do, and talk and discuss that. Moving on to my last one now, about Paris Saint-Germain. We were really fortunate to go over there and go to Stade de France, is it? Or, I don't even know what the stadium's called. But for me, one of the big things was they were building a revolutionary training ground. The thing about their training ground that's being built at the minute, everything is movable. So whether it's a current coach or a new coach in 5 years' time can change and manipulate the structures to however they see fit. So nothing's fixed. So if they feel they need a change, they can do that. And that's going to be built in the next three years. And that was something that I thought, forward thinking, everybody would love to have a facility that you could change every season if needed be, and that's what they've designed. Interesting thing to know, the current training ground with first team, 23s and academy train is right next to a school or a college. So you walk through the campus and you'd have kids coming out of college just walking straight past the first team players. So quite different environments, we're very private, and keep the general public away from our first team. I'm sure this new facility will be very similar to what we have already. For me, we got to observe training, sports science. There's a really interesting link. They work in circuits. So what they tend to do every day is they'd have 3 or 4 practices, and always one of them would be a sports science practice as well. So very much sports science was a part of their training programme, whether it was fast feet to a finish,